The Milgram Experiment. Where does conscience end and obedience begin? At what point does a human being finally say no, even when an authority demands yes? In 1961, inside the quiet halls of Yale University, a young psychologist set out to answer a question the world was still afraid to face. The Holocaust was fresh in global memory. The Nuremberg trials had exposed a defense that chilled the spine. I was just following orders. Milgram wanted to know if that excuse hid something darker. Was cruelty a product of a specific ideology, or a potential buried inside us all? So he designed an experiment that didn't look dangerous at all. On the surface, it was a harmless study about memory and learning. Picture a modest laboratory room. Fluorescent lights. A desk. A large metal box humming softly. Ordinary people from New Haven, Connecticut, were invited inside and given a simple role. They were the teachers. Their job was to test a learner in another room. Every wrong answer meant punishment. An electric shock. In front of them sat a shock generator. Rows of switches labeled in calm, clinical language. 15 volts, slight shock. 200 volts, intense. 450 volts, marked with a chilling triple X. What the teachers didn't know was that the learner was an actor. The shocks weren't real, but the fear was. As the voltage increased, the voice from the other room began to change. At 120 volts, the learner cried out in pain. At 150, he begged to be released. At 300, he screamed, claiming a heart condition. Then silence. An unbearable, empty silence. Some participants froze. Others protested. A few laughed nervously, hands shaking, sweat forming on their brows. And every time they hesitated, a man in a gray lab coat stepped in. Calm, professional, unemotional. Please continue. The experiment requires that you go on. It is absolutely essential. You have no other choice. Before the study began, Milgram asked experts to predict the outcome. They were confident. Only a tiny fraction, maybe 1%, would obey all the way to the end. They were wrong. 65% of participants continued. 65% flipped the final switch. 450 volts. They weren't sadists. They were teachers, salesmen, fathers, neighbors, good people, doing something terrible because an authority told them it was necessary. Milgram's experiment revealed something deeply unsettling. The danger wasn't hidden in monstrous individuals. It lived inside ordinary situations. Given the right setting, the right pressure, the right voice in a lab coat, morality can bend. And sometimes it breaks. If this is what authority can do in a quiet university lab, what happens when the stakes are real and the consequences are permanent? The Stanford Prison Experiment. What happens when you erase a person's identity and replace it with a role? How much of who we are is real, and how much is just a costume we learn to obey? In 1971, a quiet basement at Stanford University was transformed into something far more disturbing than a classroom. Concrete walls, narrow cells, locked doors. A prison, built not for criminals, but for an experiment. 24 psychologically healthy college students volunteered. No violent histories. No red flags. They were randomly divided into two groups: prisoners and guards. From the very first moment, the shift was unsettling. The guards were handed khaki uniforms, mirrored sunglasses that hid their eyes, and wooden batons. The prisoners were stripped, deloused, and dressed in shapeless smocks. No underwear. A nylon stocking pulled over the head to mimic a shaved scalp. A heavy chain locked around one ankle. Their names were taken away. They became numbers. The guards received a single instruction: maintain order. No rules. No limits. Just authority. Within 24 hours, the simulation stopped feeling like a game. The guards began inventing punishments. Push-ups, with boots pressing into backs. Sleep deprivation. Bathroom access denied. Middle of the night, counts for no reason at all. Psychological pressure replaced physical force. Privileges granted, then revoked on a whim. Rules enforced simply to remind the prisoners who held power. Some prisoners fought back. On the second day, they barricaded themselves inside their cells. The response was swift and brutal. Fire extinguishers blasted through the doors. The rebellion ended in minutes. After that, something broke. The prisoners grew quiet, obedient, hollow. They showed signs of severe anxiety and depression. One man collapsed emotionally after just 36 hours, screaming, shaking, unable to continue. He was released immediately. The experiment was designed to last 2 weeks. It ended after 6 days. Even the researchers weren't immune. The man overseeing the study had become so consumed by his role as prison superintendent that he stopped seeing the suffering as abnormal. It took an outsider, someone not wearing a uniform, to recognize the horror and demand it be stopped. The Stanford Prison Experiment exposed a brutal truth. The line between good and evil isn't carved in stone. It's thin, and it's fragile. Change the environment. Change the uniform. Assign a role. And ordinary people can become tyrants, or break completely under the weight of powerlessness. If identity can be rewritten this easily, what happens when an entire society starts wearing the same uniform? The bystander effect. On a cold March night in 1964, a young woman was attacked on her way home in Queens, New York. Her name would soon become inseparable from one haunting question. Why didn't anyone help? Early reports painted a horrifying picture. Dozens of neighbors, open windows, lights on, and yet, no one intervened. Later investigations would reveal the story was more complicated, the numbers exaggerated. But the damage was already done. The public was shaken, not by the crime alone, but by the silence that surrounded it. Psychologists began asking an uncomfortable question. When someone is in danger, what makes people freeze instead of act? To find out, researchers recreated emergencies in controlled settings. Imagine sitting alone in a small cubicle, speaking through an intercom as part of a casual group discussion. Nothing feels urgent, just voices in the dark. Then suddenly, one of those voices changes. Panic, choking, a cry for help. The voice simulates a violent seizure, then goes quiet. When participants believed they were the only other person listening, most reacted immediately. They ran for help. They called out. They acted. But when they believed several others were also listening, everything changed. The urgency faded. The response slowed. Only a fraction stepped in. In another experiment, the danger was impossible to ignore. Participants sat in a room filling out paperwork. Without warning, smoke began seeping in through a vent. Thick, unnatural, alarming. When people were alone, they reported it almost instantly. Calm, direct, responsible. But when 2 other people were in the room, quiet, passive, unconcerned, something strange happened. The smoke kept rising, and the real participant did nothing. Most stayed seated, eyes darting, hands frozen, waiting for someone else to react. These experiments revealed a disturbing psychological trap. The more witnesses there are, the less any one person feels responsible. Responsibility doesn't disappear. It gets divided until no one acts at all. This phenomenon became known as the bystander effect, a reminder that crowds don't always protect us. Sometimes, the presence of others doesn't create safety. It creates hesitation. And when every second matters, hesitation can be fatal. So when something goes wrong in front of a crowd, who do we expect to step forward, if not ourselves? The Asch conformity experiments. Imagine a test so simple it feels almost insulting. You're shown a single line. Next to it, 3 more, labeled A, B, and C. Your task is to say which one matches the original. The answer is obvious, undeniable. You don't even have to think. Now imagine you're sitting in a room with 7 other people. They answer aloud before you do. At first, everything is normal. Everyone agrees on the correct line. Then, without warning, something shifts. The first person gives a clearly wrong answer. Then the second. Then the third. One by one, all 7 choose the same incorrect line. Now it's your turn. Do you trust your own eyes? Or do you trust the group? This deceptively simple setup formed the backbone of a series of experiments in the 1950s designed to test how far social pressure could bend human judgment. Every other person in the room was part of the setup. They were instructed to give the wrong answer, together, again and again. The results were startling. Nearly 3 out of 4 participants went along with the group at least once. not because the task was confusing, but because standing alone felt harder than being wrong. Some participants genuinely began to doubt themselves. If everyone else sees something different, maybe my perception is flawed. Maybe I'm mistaken. But most knew the truth. They could see the correct line. They understood the group was wrong. And still, they conformed. Why? Fear of embarrassment. Fear of standing out. Fear of being the only one who didn't belong. In private, they trusted their senses. In public, they surrendered them. When participants completed the same task alone, accuracy was nearly perfect. The only thing that changed was the presence of a unanimous group. The Ash experiments revealed something unsettling. Reality isn't always what we see. It's often what we agree not to challenge. And if people will deny the evidence of their own eyes over a simple line on a card, what else are we willing to ignore just to avoid being the odd one out? The Robber's Cave Experiment. Where does prejudice come from? Is it taught at home, or does it grow naturally the moment we divide into groups? In the summer of 1954, a remote boys' camp in rural Oklahoma became the setting for an unsettling test. 200 acres of forests, cabins, and lakes. A place meant for friendship and adventure. 22 11-year-old boys arrived, all strangers to one another. Similar backgrounds. No history of conflict. Nothing that should have set them apart. They were quietly split into two groups and kept separate. For days, each group bonded in isolation. They swam together, played games, chose names for themselves. One became the Eagles, the other, the Rattlers. Loyalty formed quickly. So did pride. Then came the competition. The groups were introduced through a series of zero-sum games. Win or lose, no ties. The prize was tempting. A trophy, and brand new pocket knives for the winners. The losers would get nothing. The shift was immediate. Friendly rivalry turned into open hostility. Insults flew across the field. Songs mocking the other side echoed through the camp. Then it escalated. Flags were burned. Cabins were raided. Beds overturned. Personal belongings stolen. The boys refused to eat together. When asked to describe the other group, they used words like dirty and mean. Their own group? Brave, loyal, good. In less than a week, a peaceful summer camp had become a miniature battlefield. The experiment had proven its point. Conflict didn't require deep differences, just competition over limited rewards. But the most revealing part came next. The researchers tried to undo the damage. They brought the groups together for movies and meals. Nothing changed. The hatred remained. Only when a new problem appeared did things shift. The camp's water supply suddenly failed. A truck needed to bring food broke down. Problems no single group could solve alone. Faced with a shared threat, cooperation replaced conflict. Hands reached across group lines. Conversations restarted. Laughter returned. By the end of the camp, former enemies were choosing to sit together, sharing snacks, riding home on the same bus. The Robber's Cave Experiment revealed something powerful. Division can be manufactured with frightening ease, but unity can be rebuilt when people are given a reason to work toward the same goal. If competition can turn strangers into enemies, what kinds of conflicts are we creating without even realizing it? The monster study. Can a word become a wound? Can a label, spoken by an authority, change the course of a child's life? In 1939, inside the halls of an American university, an experiment was carried out so ethically disturbing that it remained hidden for more than 6 decades. Those who knew about it gave it a chilling nickname, the monster study. The goal sounded academic. Understand the origins of stuttering. At the time, one controversial idea suggested that stuttering wasn't something a child was born with, but something they learned. Not through biology, through fear. To test this, researchers turned to a nearby orphanage. 22 children were selected. Some already struggled with speech. Others spoke fluently and confidently. They were divided into 2 groups. One group was treated with kindness. They were praised, reassured, told their speech was improving. The other group received something very different. Children who spoke clearly were told they were doing it wrong, that their speech showed signs of a stutter, that they should avoid talking unless they could do it perfectly. Children who already stuttered were told there was no hope, that their speech was terrible, that they were broken. Over time, the effects became impossible to ignore. Children who had once spoken freely grew quiet. They hesitated. They avoided eye contact. They stopped raising their hands. Some of the fluent speakers developed the very speech problems they had been accused of having. Their confidence collapsed. Their school performance followed. For the children who already struggled, the damage was even worse. Their stutters intensified. Shame replaced effort. Fear replaced growth. The experiment ended, but the consequences did not. Many of those children carried the psychological scars for the rest of their lives. All because of words. All because someone in authority told them who they were. When the study finally came to light decades later, the institution behind it issued a public apology. Financial settlements followed. But nothing could return what had been taken. The monster study revealed a terrifying truth. Labels don't just describe reality. They can create it. And when those labels come from power, they can shape a life in ways that are permanent. If words alone can do this to a child, what happens when entire societies are labeled and forced to believe it? The learned helplessness experiment. What does it take to make a living being stop trying? Not fail once. Not hesitate. But truly believe that effort itself is pointless. In the late 1960s, a series of laboratory experiments uncovered a psychological truth so disturbing that it reshaped how we understand trauma, depression, and human resilience. The setup seemed straightforward. Dogs were placed into harnesses and divided into 3 groups. The first group experienced nothing unpleasant. They were restrained briefly, then released. The second group received electric shocks, but with a crucial difference. They had control. By pressing a lever with their nose, they could stop the shock. They learned quickly. Action led to relief. The third group was different. These dogs received shocks identical in intensity and duration to the second group. But their lever did nothing. No matter what they tried, the pain continued. From their perspective, the shocks were random, unpredictable, unstoppable. Then came the real test. Each dog was placed in a shuttle box, a divided chamber with a low barrier in the middle. A warning light appeared. Seconds later, the floor on one side became electrified. Escape was easy. All they had to do was jump over the barrier. The dogs from the first 2 groups did exactly that. They learned the pattern. Light on, jump, safe. But the third group did something chilling. When the shock began, many didn't move. They didn't jump. They didn't even try. They lay down on the electrified floor and whimpered, absorbing the pain in silence. Freedom was inches away, but in their minds, it didn't exist. They had learned a lesson far more powerful than fear. They had learned that nothing they did mattered. This phenomenon became known as learned helplessness. Once a belief in powerlessness takes hold, it can override instinct, logic, even survival. The implications were enormous. The same mechanism could explain why people stay in abusive situations, why trauma can paralyze action, why systems that remove agency don't just control bodies, they reshape minds. Sometimes, the strongest prison isn't locked. It's learned. And once someone believes escape is impossible, how do you convince them to try again? The smoke-filled room experiment. You're sitting alone in a quiet room, calmly filling out a survey. Then you notice it. Smoke. At first it's thin, almost easy to dismiss. But it keeps coming, curling out of a vent, thickening by the second. Your instincts should take over. Stand up. Ask questions. Get out. Now change one detail. You're not alone. 2 other people are in the room. They notice the smoke. They glance at it. Then they look back down and keep writing, completely calm. What do? This unsettling scenario was carefully designed to answer a simple question. Why do people ignore danger when others seem unconcerned? When participants were placed alone in the room, the response was immediate. Most reported the smoke within minutes, long before it became overwhelming. But when 2 passive strangers were added, everything changed. The smoke grew thicker. It filled the room. It blurred vision. People coughed. And still, almost no one moved. 9 out of 10 participants stayed seated for the full duration of the experiment. Pens in hand, forms unfinished, surrounded by smoke. Later, when asked why they didn't act, the answers were rationalizations. Steam, air conditioning, something harmless. But beneath those explanations was a powerful psychological trap. In uncertain situations, we look to others for guidance. If no one else reacts, we assume there's nothing to react to. This phenomenon is known as pluralistic ignorance. Everyone feels uneasy. No one shows it. So everyone concludes they must be wrong. The result is a collective illusion where silence reinforces silence. The experiment revealed something chilling. Social pressure doesn't just shape opinions. It can override survival instincts. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the smoke. It's the unspoken agreement to pretend everything is fine. The Good Samaritan Experiment. Does morality guarantee action? Does thinking about kindness make us more likely to help someone in need? In 1973, psychologists set out to test this in a place where moral reflection should have been second nature, the Princeton Theological Seminary. Their subjects were seminary students, future ministers, people devoted to spiritual and ethical principles. The setup was deceptively simple. Each student was asked to prepare a short talk. Some would speak on the parable of the Good Samaritan. Others, on neutral topics like job prospects for seminary graduates. Then came the real test. As the students walked to another building to record their talks, they passed a man slumped in a doorway, eyes closed, groaning, clearly in distress. Who would stop? The experiment examined two factors. First, did thinking about the Good Samaritan make someone more likely to act like one? Second, how would time pressure affect their response? Some students were told, "You're late. They've been expecting you. Hurry." Others were told they had time. No rush at all. The results were striking. The topic of their talk, Good Samaritan or not, had almost no effect. The deciding factor was urgency. Students in a relaxed state, 63% stopped to help. Those in moderate hurry, 45%. Students who were told they were late, only 10% paused. Some literally stepped over the man, rushing to speak about helping strangers. The lesson was clear. Moral principles, even deeply held ones, can be overridden by situational pressures. A ticking clock, a looming deadline, a sense of hurry. It can silence the Good Samaritan in all of us. Intentions alone are fragile. Action requires more than belief. It requires the space and time to choose to act. In other words, morality is not automatic. Sometimes, it's easily blocked by something as simple as a ticking clock. The third wave experiment. How could an entire population stand by while atrocities unfolded? How could ordinary, educated people follow a regime without question? In 1967, a high school history teacher in Palo Alto, California, decided to answer this question for his skeptical 10th grade students. They insisted it couldn't happen here. He decided to show them. He called it the third wave. It began simply, with discipline. Students had to sit at attention, address him formally as Mr. Jones, stand when speaking. Every response clipped, precise, automatic. At first, the students were bemused. By the second day, they embraced it. Then came community. Chants, strength through discipline, strength through community. A salute, hand cupped across the chest. Mandatory for everyone. The class, once a group of individuals, now functioned as a unified body. By Wednesday, action was introduced. Membership cards were issued, some marked with a red X. These students were tasked with reporting peers who broke the rules. The classroom dynamics shifted. Leaders hesitated. Quiet students thrived, becoming zealous, loyal, empowered. The movement spread through the school. By Thursday, over 200 students were enrolled. But enthusiasm turned dangerous. Minor infractions were reported. The fervor was absolute. Jones realized he had created the very mindset he sought to critique. He had to stop it. On Friday, students gathered in the auditorium, tense and expectant. Banners, salutes, faces full of anticipation. Jones turned on a television. Only static. Then he revealed the truth. There was no movement, no national leader. They had been participants in an experiment on fascism. He showed them images of Nazi rallies, the salutes, the conformity. "You would have been good Germans," he said. The students were stunned, some in tears, finally grasping the chilling reality. The desire for order, for belonging, for purpose, seeds of authoritarianism, exist in all of us. They only need the right conditions to bloom. Even the most ordinary setting can become a crucible for obedience. Even ordinary people can be swept into extraordinary conformity. The lesson was clear and haunting. Fascism doesn't require monsters. It only requires willing hearts. If these experiments have left you questioning human nature, wondering how ordinary people can be pushed to extraordinary extremes, don't stop here. Subscribe to Strange Whys and dive deeper into the mysteries, experiments, and hidden truths that shape our world. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode, and join a community that seeks to uncover the strange, the shocking, and the unsettling stories history doesn't always tell. Because curiosity isn't just about knowing, it's about understanding why.